Story 1: Shadows of the Past. Part 1: The Old House. Deep in the forest, at the edge of an abandoned village, stood an old house shrouded in dark legends. It was said that the house once belonged to the wealthy and influential Petrov family, who mysteriously disappeared one dreadful night. Since then, the house had stood empty, its walls absorbing the shadows of the past, and the rare passers-by who dared to approach felt an inexplicable cold and fear. A young couple, Alexei and Marina, were looking for a secluded place to rest when they stumbled upon this house. They ignored the warnings of the locals, who spoke of the house being cursed and of strange and frightening things happening there. Alexei was fascinated by the house's history and hoped to unravel its mystery, while Marina felt a vague unease but did not want to disappoint her husband. The first evening passed peacefully. The couple unpacked their belongings, prepared dinner, and enjoyed the tranquility of the forest. But as night fell, the house began to reveal its dark side. Footsteps echoed in the corridors, even though they were sure no one else was in the house. Marina noticed strange shadows on the walls that moved independently of the light sources. Alexei dismissed it as fatigue and imagination, but soon he too felt the cold emanating from the depths of the house. Part 2: Hidden Signs. The next day, the couple discovered an old diary in one of the rooms. Its pages were filled with accounts of strange events that had occurred in the house, objects disappearing, strange voices, and visions. The diary mentioned a ritual that the Petrov family had performed, hoping to summon a protective spirit, but something had gone wrong. Marina felt increasing fear and begged Alexei to leave the house, but he insisted on staying another night to figure out what had happened to the family. He hoped the diary would provide the key to the mystery. As they read further, they discovered that the ritual had been intended to summon a guardian, but instead it had called forth a malevolent spirit that had seized their souls. Part 3: The Night Vision. That night, Marina was awakened by a whisper. She stepped into the corridor and saw a woman in old-fashioned clothes calling her name. Marina, as if hypnotized, followed the ghost to the basement, where she found a hidden door. Opening it, she discovered a small room with an altar and strange symbols on the walls. Alexei, hearing the noise, descended into the basement and found Marina in a trance, muttering something while staring at the altar. Suddenly, the spirit of the woman appeared before them and began to tell her story. She was the mother of the Petrov family, and the ritual they had performed had summoned not a guardian but an evil spirit that had captured their souls. The woman pleaded with Alexei and Marina to help her family find peace. To do so, they needed to complete the ritual using an ancient scroll hidden somewhere in the house. Part 4: Liberation. Finding the scroll was not easy. The house began to resist their efforts. Doors slammed shut on their own, stairs creaked and collapsed, and shadows grew increasingly aggressive. Alexei and Marina felt the house coming alive, trying to engulf them. But their determination was stronger. They finally found the scroll in one of the old books in the library. Alexei read the incantation, and the room filled with bright light. The ghosts of the Petrov family began to appear before them, their faces expressing gratitude and relief. The spirit of the malevolent sorcerer, who had trapped their souls, began to scream and vanish, dissolving in the light. After completing the ritual, the house became quiet again. Alexei and Marina left it the next day, leaving behind the dark secrets of the past forever. Upon returning home, they felt they had not only freed the souls of the deceased, but also liberated themselves from the shadows that had haunted them. Story 2: Forest Guardians. Part 1: Missing Tourists. In one of the wild forests of Russia, people began to disappear. Tourists, researchers, and even locals who ventured into the forest did not return. The forest gained a bad reputation, and local authorities tried to understand what was happening, but all attempts ended in failure. The forest was considered cursed, and many began to avoid it. One day, a group of young people decided to investigate and find out what was hiding in the forest. They were confident they could solve the mystery and bring fame to themselves and their research project. The group consisted of 5 people: Anton, Lena, Igor, Svetlana, and Oleg. They were experienced tourists and unafraid of challenges. The expedition started well. The group delved deeper into the forest, enjoying the beauty of nature. But as they ventured further, they began to notice strange things. At night they were awakened by sounds, whispers, footsteps, and even children's laughter. It seemed that the forest itself was watching them. The next day, they stumbled upon an abandoned camp with items belonging to the missing tourists. There were no signs of struggle or bodies. Part 2: Ghostly Voices. The first night in the forest, strange sounds kept them from sleeping. Lena and Svetlana felt increasing anxiety, but Anton and Igor tried to reassure them, claiming it was just the sounds of the forest. But the next night, Anton heard a voice calling his name. He followed the sound and disappeared. The others, waking up, found Anton missing. Panic set in, but they decided not to split up and look for him together. During their search for Anton, they found ancient totems and symbols on the trees. In one cave, they met an old man who lived as a hermit. He told them a legend about the forest guardian spirits protecting the forest from uninvited guests. He warned them that the spirits could be both kind and evil, depending on how they were treated. Part 3: Ancient Spirits. The old man offered to help them and gave them amulets for protection. He also explained that to save Anton, they needed to perform a ritual of reconciliation with the spirits, asking for forgiveness and offering a sacrifice. The group didn't know if they could trust the old man, but they had no other choice. That night, they performed the ritual at the designated spot, laying offerings and reciting ancient incantations. The forest filled with light, and spirits began to appear around them. They looked like shadows of people, animals, and even trees. The group stood in fear, not knowing what to expect next. Suddenly, Anton appeared before them. He was conscious but seemed to be held by something. One of the spirits approached them and spoke, explaining that they had trespassed on sacred lands and disturbed the peace. But thanks to the ritual, the spirits decided to let them go. Part 4: Liberation. Anton was freed, and the group hurried to leave the forest. On their way out, they thanked the old man for his help and promised never to disturb the forest spirits again. Upon returning home, they shared their story, and the forest was declared a protected area, closed to visitors. The group realized that the spirit world was real and required respect and caution. Years passed, and the legends of the forest guardians continued to be passed down from generation to generation. People began to understand that the forest was not just a place for recreation, but a sacred territory that demanded respect. Anton, Lena, Igor, Svetlana, and Oleg became famous researchers, but every time they recalled that expedition, they felt a mixture of fear and gratitude. Story 3: The Mirror's Curse. Part 1: The Family Legacy. Once, in an old mansion belonging to the Grigoryev family, an unusual mirror was found. It was adorned with intricate patterns and seemed to hide something more than just reflections. The family had kept this mirror for generations, considering it a family relic. A young girl named Anastasia, the heir to the mansion, decided to spend a weekend in the old house. She had been studying her family's history for a long time and was convinced that the mirror could be the key to unraveling some mysteries. Anastasia had always been interested in her family's history. She spent hours in the old library, reading about her ancestors and their lives. The mirror had attracted her attention since childhood, and she felt that it held some kind of power. One evening, while studying old documents, she came across her great-grandmother's diary. It spoke of strange events connected to the mirror and hinted that it could show more than just reflections. Part 2: Strange Reflections. As night fell, Anastasia noticed odd things. Silhouettes that did not correspond to reality began to appear in the mirror. She saw ghosts moving around the room, and even her grandmother, who had died many years ago. Anastasia tried to convince herself that it was just the play of light and shadow, but fear began to grow. The next day, she found her grandmother's diary, which contained records about the mirror. It turned out that the mirror had belonged to an ancient sorcerer who had sealed souls inside it. Its power was so great that the mirror could show the past, present, and even the future. Anastasia began to investigate the mirror, hoping to understand its nature. She noticed that the longer she looked into the mirror, the more it influenced her mind. She began to see scenes from the past that she had never witnessed before, realizing that her family had dealt with powerful forces. Part 3: Voices from the Past. Anastasia began to hear voices coming from the mirror. They begged her to free them, telling of their torments and terrible events that had occurred in the house. she realized she had to do something to break the curse. She found a ritual described in the diary and decided to perform it. At night, when the moon was at its peak, she lit candles and began to recite spells. Suddenly, the mirror began to vibrate, and ghosts started to emerge from it. The ghosts surrounded Anastasia, but instead of frightening her, they began to tell their stories. She learned how each of them had ended up trapped in the mirror and about the evil that had cursed them. The last to appear was the sorcerer himself, who wanted to stop her, but the forces of light invoked by the ritual began to prevail. Part 4: Liberation. Anastasia completed the ritual, and the mirror shattered into thousands of shards. The ghosts were freed and disappeared, and the sorcerer was banished forever. The mansion became a bright and peaceful place, and Anastasia realized that her family was finally free from the ancient evil. She felt relief and joy, knowing that her actions had not only freed the souls of the dead but also secured her own future. Anastasia decided to continue studying her family's history, but now she knew that her task was to protect and preserve peace, not to unravel dark secrets. She understood that the power hidden in family relics could be both a blessing and a curse. The Grigoryev mansion became a place of tranquility and harmony, and Anastasia found a new purpose in life. Story 4: The Dark Forest. Part 1: The Mysterious Expedition. In one of the most remote forests of Russia, a group of researchers decided to conduct an expedition. Their goal was to study the local myths and legends associated with the forest. It was said that ancient spirits and creatures lived in this forest, and terrible stories were told about them. The expedition began well, but as they ventured deeper into the forest, strange things started to happen. At night, they heard whispers and saw shadows flitting between the trees. The forest seemed alive, watching them. One morning, one of the group members, Andrei, did not return to camp. His tracks suddenly disappeared, as if he had vanished into thin air. The others began searching but found nothing. At night, they heard whispers again, and this time they sounded like Andrei's voice. The next day, the group found an old hut hidden deep in the forest. Inside, they discovered ancient artifacts and records about a tribe that once lived in this forest. The tribe worshipped forest spirits, and their shamans could communicate with the spirit world. Part 2: Meeting the Spirits. At night, the group decided to perform a ritual to communicate with the spirits, using the artifacts they found. During the ritual, the forest came alive, the trees began to move, and ghostly figures appeared before them. They learned that the forest spirits protected their lands and did not want to be disturbed. One of the spirits told them that Andrei had been captured by an evil spirit that fed on fear and souls. To save him, they needed to offer a sacrifice and ask the spirits for forgiveness. The group gathered all their strength and performed the ritual, sacrificing one of their belongings. The forest filled with light, and the evil spirit was banished. Andrei returned to them, but he was severely weakened and frightened. Part 3: Tribal Secrets. The group continued to study the forest, hoping to learn more about the ancient tribe and its rituals. They found many artifacts testifying to the tribe's deep connection with nature and the spirits. The researchers realized that the tribe possessed knowledge that had been lost over time. One of the most valuable finds was an ancient book written in an unknown language. It contained descriptions of rituals and spells that could control the forest spirits. The group decided to translate the book and understand its meaning. They hoped this would help them establish contact with the spirits and avoid further conflicts. Part 4: Sacrifice and Salvation. Translating the book was a difficult and lengthy process. The group worked day and night, trying to decipher the ancient symbols and understand their meaning. Eventually, they found the key to the puzzle and learned about a ritual that could permanently reconcile them with the forest spirits. At night, they performed the ritual according to the book's instructions. The forest came alive again, and the spirits appeared before them. This time, they were not hostile but benevolent. The group offered sacrifices and asked for forgiveness for their intrusion. The spirits accepted their apologies and promised not to harm people if they respected the forest. The group left the forest, realizing that the spirit world existed and required respect and caution. They returned home with new knowledge and stories that forever changed their lives. The forest was declared a protected area, and people learned to respect its secrets and powers. Story 5: The Night Train. Part 1: The Strange Passenger. One cold winter night in Russia, a train bound for Moscow took on a strange passenger. He sat at the very end of the car and seemed invisible to the others. The conductor, noticing him, tried to check his ticket, but the passenger disappeared as soon as he approached. Passengers began to tell each other scary stories about ghosts and spirits that might inhabit old trains. The atmosphere became tense, and some began to feel an inexplicable fear. At the next station, an old man boarded the train, who seemed familiar to many of the passengers. He began to tell a story about a cursed train that had disappeared several years ago, along with all its passengers. The old man claimed to have seen this train, and that it appeared on different routes, scaring people. Part 2: Ghostly Visions. At night, the passengers began to see strange visions. Faces that shouldn't have been there flashed in the windows, and footsteps and whispers were heard in the corridors. Some claimed to see the missing passengers from the legend. Panic grew, and the train seemed like a living entity, striving to engulf their souls. One of the passengers, Alexei, decided to find out what was happening. He began to explore the train and found old photographs and records confirming the old man's words. Alexei realized that the train was indeed cursed, and that the curse was linked to the strange passenger who had disappeared at the beginning of the journey. Part 3: The Mystery of the Curse. Alexei found the diary of one of the conductors, who had kept records of strange events on the train. It turned out that many years ago, a tragedy had occurred on the train. One of the passengers was brutally murdered, and his soul remained trapped in the train. Since then, the train had been cursed, and its appearance heralded misfortune. Alexei realized that they needed to find a way to free the soul of the murdered passenger. He shared his suspicions with the other passengers, and they decided to perform an exorcism ritual. The diary contained the necessary steps and spells that could help. Part 4: Liberation. At night, a group of passengers gathered in one of the cars and began the ritual. They lit candles, recited spells, and made offerings. The train began to vibrate, and ghostly figures appeared around them. The passengers felt the spirits watching them, hoping for a successful outcome. Suddenly, the strange passenger appeared before them again. He looked malevolent and tried to stop the ritual, but the forces of light invoked by the spells began to prevail. The soul of the murdered passenger appeared and thanked them for their help. The ghost disappeared, and the train stopped vibrating. The passengers felt relieved and realized that the curse had been lifted. The train safely arrived in Moscow, and people went about their business, forever remembering that scary night. Alexei became a hero, sharing his story and warning others that the spirit world was real and required respect.